Alright guys, welcome to the Sim Standard. Want to do a video here, talk about some comments, ratings Czar, Donny, EA Sports, Madden 2012 made, and basically give you my take on them from a real football perspective. Now, for those of you who don't know, that's 41-year-old Jeff George in the background going through some passing drills as he attempted to enter the NFL unsuccessfully last season, but now you're going to see the comments in question. For those of you who watch on your mobile devices, I'm going to go and read it at verbatim, that way you obviously know what's being said here. EA Sports, keep in mind this is an employer interviewing an employee. How involved do you get in these projections? It sounds like you're putting together your own big board or something. This is in relation to him talking about the NFL Draft Combine this year and how he rates these players. His response, yeah, although we don't put together a big board to say, quote, this is who we think is going to be what, quote, we're just strictly reacting. We're always trying to react to what's going on in the real world. A lot of that is based on perception, right? We don't know who is going to get drafted where, but we have a pretty good idea of where a lot of these guys rank right now. Most of the time, that doesn't change dramatically between now and the actual draft. Jeff George, a few years ago, I don't think was perceived as the #1 quarterback, but he's the guy the Colts ended up making the first pick overall, and ESPN draft analysis, Mel Kiper, ended up jumping all over them. A lot of that was because nobody perceived Jeff George as a guy you needed to spend a big pick on. It's perception, but it's all based on the scouts' perception and the pundits' perception that these other experts really follow football. It's all about trying to come up with this one number for whatever rating might be, and a lot of times you see conflicting information, of course. So, who didn't think Jeff George was the #1 quarterback from that draft other than possibly Mel Kiper and Donny Moore? You know, if we're talking quarterback, how can you even say that he wasn't the big pick guy? You know, here's the top 7 picks from that draft. Now, both the Colts and Lions needed a quarterback, so it's clear that 2 quarterbacks were going to be off the board before pick 8. Ware went to the Lions. The next quarterback was drafted in round 3, Tommy Hudson. So, as far as Mel Kiper jumping all over them, you know, Mel said that Jeff was an average quarterback, and he was right. However, you know, any real football fan knows that Mel Kiper actually hangs his hat on guessing the outcome of Rick Meyer and Jeff George, you know, but ironically, it's that same draft class, if you go back and look, that he overhyped Ware, saying that he was going to be a great NFL quarterback. You know, it didn't turn out that way for him, but certainly all we're going to do is pick and point what information we want to take out of things. You know, to be honest with you, Mel Kiper, and I'm not, you know, taking anything away from him, he's a great draft analyst, but he's also a guy that said that Haley and Tomlinson was the 3rd best back in 2001, ranked behind Deuce McAllister and Michael Bennett. You know, let's not forget he also ranked a guy named Dan McGuire and Brett Favre evenly. So, you know, truth be told, this is what Mel Kiper had to say in retrospect. Jeff George had a great arm, and Jeff George had a lot of great games in this league. People were putting Jeff George in the Hall of Fame early in his career, so I'm just telling you this is ridiculous. And you know what, to a point, he's right. Jeff George was a great player. He had a great arm. And by the way, from 1991 to 1997, Jeff George was the most sacked quarterback in the league. In 1997, despite being the most sacked quarterback, he led the league in passing yards. It's not debatable. He never played behind a good line. You know, in the modern day, we talked about guys like Jamarcus Russell or David Carr, you know, what these guys could do with a good line. Well, you know what? Jeff George made things happen with poor lines, period. You know, right now he sits 39th all-time in quarterback rating, ahead of guys, ahead of other Colts, you know, like Burt Jones, Johnny Unitas, Jim Harbaugh, Greg Landry, and you know, one guy that really wasn't much of a Colt, John Elway. You know, ironically, if we talk arm strength alone, I'm going to put Jeff George, John Elway, and Burt Jones in my top 3. You know, maybe you want to put Dan Marino in there a close 4th. But you know, what separated Jeff George was he actually had great mechanics. And again, even looking at this footage of him at 41 years old, Uncle Rico style, he still has a great release and a fast motion. If he lacked anywhere, it was going to be in his accuracy and his attitude. And, you know, take into account the guy never spent more than 3 years with any team, you know, it's pretty easy to chalk that up to not having chemistry with your receivers. You know, obviously, moving around like that, he probably walked into situations with an understandable chip on his shoulder. He finished 154 touchdowns to 113 interceptions, over 27,000 yards. Ware went 5 for 8, under 1,000 or close to 1,000. I mean, that's football from somebody who watched the game. You know, those are the numbers you need to look at. And that's from a guy that has a Jeff George jersey. that was a Colts fan in 1990 that harbors no resentment to him at all in terms of Jeff George. But you know what? This is what EA gets when they have one person as a ratings czar. And you know what? Even if it was just one person, they should keep him quiet as a church mouse 100% of the time. So maybe on the next podcast, Donnie Moore can explain some things. Because frankly, hell, I want to listen. I want to know. If he doesn't think Jeff George was perceived as the number one quarterback in the 1990 draft, then who was and why? And if a lot of people perceive Jeff George as the guy you didn't need to spend a big pick on, where is this comment based? Find me one other person that is an expert that said Jeff George was not worth a big pick and shouldn't go first round other than Donny Moore and Mel Kiper. You know, for him to come out, and if you want to read that article and talk about how football is all perception and he relies on experts that really follow football, you know, Donnie, my response is you borderline get paid to follow football. In all honesty, you should be embarrassed to cite that you use resources like ESPN Insider, Sporting News, War Room, and Football Outsiders as a basis for your ratings. I mean, that's real fact out of your article. You know, you have unlimited NFL resources at your disposal, and you essentially just gobble up secondhand information. There's no excuse for it. I would love to know what you guys think about not just the whole Jeff George debacle here, but I mean, let's talk about what you feel when you hear the guy that is basically creating the core and the heart of Madden not know about football in such a cut and dry fashion. And you know what? After hearing this, I wouldn't be shocked if Donnie Moore and Ian Cummings don't want any part of us on their podcast. So those are my questions to you, Donnie. I would love to tune into the next podcast and hear some responses and really some reasoning behind your thoughts and opinions on Jeff George.